Illuminati philosopher, and these are my thoughts. Denzel Washington is set to play Hannibal in an upcoming Netflix movie. Some people are claiming that this is a race swap. But is it?
When I was growing up, I was taught in American history books that Africa had no history, and neither did I. That I was a savage, about whom the less said the better, who had been saved by Europe and brought to America. And of course, I believed it. I didn't have much choice. Those are the only books there were. Everyone else seemed to agree.
A white man that I've worked for, if he's alive today, he's a liberal with a capital L. His name was Gagsteiner. I asked him about some books on the African people in ancient history. And in the language of the South, he let me down slow. I mean, he spoke kindly. He said, you know, John, I'm sorry that you came from a race that's made no history. But if you persevere, if you obey laws and study hard, you make history someday.
So white culture has a habit of misrepresenting Black and African history. They have been controlling and misrepresenting Black and African history for centuries, putting erroneous ideas about Black and African history into people's heads. Also, there were white people in blackface. They made a huge profit exploiting Black culture by pretending to be Black. So you have to ask yourself, who's most likely to race swap? And don't get me started on the huge embarrassment of the civil rights movement. That was, is, and will continue to be a disgrace for white culture, claiming that they have all this distinguished history compared to Blacks, but the Blacks in the mid-20th century, so-called uncivilized Blacks, have to convince civilized white people to be civilized. Hence, civil rights movement. We are supposed to believe history from a culture like that? What a joke. Now, before I get into the biggest race swap of all time, there are Africans or an African on coins with an elephant on the reverse side, which would appear to depict Hannibal, but people are going to say that this is an Etruscan coin. Be mindful that the Etruscans and the Carthaginians had dealings with one another. Also, Hannibal was a very feared general to the point where he would be considered the boogeyman. Very scary. Now you have to ask yourself, what's more scarier to white people? A very brilliant white general on an elephant or a very brilliant Black general on an elephant? What would be more scary to a bunch of white people? Also, Carthage was decimated, pretty much utterly destroyed. Now, is it more likely that they would do that to a very successful Black civilization or a very successful white civilization? Bear in mind, Germany was a hot mess. World War I, World War II, but after all that, they allowed Germany to rise. Not conclusive, but based on that logic, most likely Carthage was a civilized Black society, not white. Now, the biggest race swap in human history and the reason for a gigantic distortion of history is changing the Black Madonna and child to white. I'm going to explain to you exactly who that Black woman is and how white culture totally manipulated history on a massive scale. So that Black woman is none other than Isis. She's also known as Makeda. The Ethiopians call her Makeda. She's also known as Queen of Sheba. And eventually, she married King Solomon and became Queen T, because Amenhotep III is King Solomon. And if you know anything about Queen T, she was very much respected in various parts of the world, practically all over the world. This woman was the boss. Okay, Nefertiti has nothing on her. I don't know why we're bigging up Nefertiti. She has nothing on Queen T. Anyway, the story goes like this. The Queen of Sheba goes to see King Solomon. Yada, yada, yada. They have a bet. Now, the Queen of Sheba thinks that there's no way I'm going to lose the bet. But she's dealing with a crafty king, which is King Solomon, Amenhotep III. He tricks her, and he sleeps with her. His pull-out game is weak. She eventually goes back home, and she realizes that she has a child. Now, she keeps the child because it belongs to the most powerful man in the world. She's going to keep the child. But the problem is that this is a disgrace because she has a child out of wedlock. She did not marry him first. She has a child out of wedlock. She can't tell her people that she went to see the most powerful man in the world. She wasn't smart enough to get him to marry her first and then have the child. No, she had the child. She got impregnated and went back home. No. She can't admit that. So she has to come up with a story. So guess what story she comes up with? Right? Guess. Eventually, she goes back to King Solomon and gets him to marry her. And evidence of this is on the Hathor temple. Yes, the evidence is on the Hathor temple. So if you see this right here, that woman is Queen T and Amenhotep III. These lying historians are going to tell you that, oh, Ptolemy XII created the Hathor temple, which doesn't make any sense, right? It's the equivalent of Europeans going to America and creating a temple of a Native American woman that existed way before their time. Why would they do that? Why would they create a temple of a Native American woman that existed way before their time? Has nothing to do with their culture. Doesn't make any sense. Anyway, they're going to say that that's Cleopatra and her son Caesarion. No, that's Queen T and Amenhotep III, because this obviously was done after the fact. He already married her, he already claimed the son, so this temple was done after the fact. So they're legitimizing what happened. So Queen T, Amenhotep III, then you see a child, which is Horus, which is Amenhotep IV, who became Amenhotep IV, who became the heretic Pharaoh Akhenaten. So you see a child, and you see someone clearly looks like Isis, and then you see the elevation of their status. It's right there in your face. They're telling you this. And it's also in the mythology. But in the mythology, Amenhotep III is Ra, and she's Isis. Isis tricks Ra, and she gets his name, and that means that she married him. She married him. She wanted to get power for her son and herself, and that's what she did. And the evidence is on the Hathor temple. It's right there in your face. So these white people, these nasty white people, this is not all white people. I understand that. This is just like nasty, racist white people that love to manipulate and distort history. That's exactly what they did. So they're going to claim that, no, we're going to change it to white. God put a bun in the oven of the woman. And notice that throughout Jesus' history, like a good chunk of his history, nobody knows who this guy is. 90% of his life, nobody knows who he is. He only becomes popular in his 30s. And as fast as he becomes popular, he becomes unpopular. I mean, it's an absolutely ridiculous story, but they had centuries to indoctrinate people into the story. And even some black people would like have problems with what I'm saying right now, but that's the actual truth. That's the actual story. She was originally black, and they swapped her for white and created this ridiculous story to cover it up. Those people are ridiculous.
Isis and the name of the sun god. The Egyptians were firm believers in magic. The goddess Isis was considered to be especially potent in the magical arts, and one of her greatest coups came when she persuaded Re to divulge his secret name so that she held power over him. Isis was a clever woman, explained one story, more intelligent than countless gods. She was ignorant of nothing in heaven or on earth. She wanted to place herself and her son Horus at the head of the pantheon of gods, and the only way to do this was to discover Re's secret name. One day Isis came upon Re when he was asleep, snoring loudly. From the corner of his open mouth hung a long dribble of saliva, which gathered weight and fell to the ground. Isis pounced. Scooping up the spittle, she mixed it with clay in the form of a poisonous snake. Then she breathed magic into the snake to make it come alive. Isis had noted Re's movements and knew that every so often he would leave his palace to go for a walk. Each time on his route, he passed a crossroads. Isis left her snake there and awaited further developments. Re emerged for his excursion, and as Isis had planned, the snake bit him. Re saw nothing, but he felt the poison coursing through him. In pain, he called to the 9 gods of the Ennead for help. Re had a fever and was sweating and shivering, but the other gods were helpless. they could do no more than mourn the impending loss of the son. Isis then made a dramatic entrance. She could cure him, she said, but only if he would tell her his name. Ray refused. She offered again and again, but still he declined. Eventually, his agony became so extreme that he could bear it no longer, and he agreed to give Isis the secret on condition that she should tell it to no one other than her son, Horus. Isis accepted these terms, and speaking aloud the god's true name, she removed the poison. The sun god was cured at once, and Isis and Horus attained the power that they had sought.